Welcome back to the deep dive. And we have a stack of research today that, to be honest, it really made me a bit uncomfortable.
It does, doesn't it?
Yeah, because usually when we dig into history or, theology, it feels distant, it feels safe.
Mm-hmm.
But today, we're asking a question that just hits a little too close to home.
It really does. And the question on the table seems so simple. What is the church?
Right. And if you asked me that yesterday, I would given you the standard answer. It's a building with a steeple. It's a community of worship.
Where do you go on Sundays?
Exactly, to get your spiritual battery recharged. It's a religious institution.
That is the standard definition. But the lecture series we're breaking down today, from a speaker named Gildong Mu, argues that that definition isn't just incomplete. He argues it's a distraction.
A distraction from what?
From the money.
Ah,
Gildong Mu argues that if you strip away all the stained glass and the choirs, the church was originally designed by God specifically as an economic community, a survival mechanism.
see, that's where I get stuck. Because economic community, that sounds like a business. Or, I don't know, a co-op, a credit union.
Right.
The church is supposed to be spiritual. It's about the soul.
And that is exactly the dichotomy Gildong Mu wants to completely shatter. He argues that in the biblical worldview, you can't separate the soul from the stomach.
Okay.
If a church isn't addressing the economic survival of its members, he actually calls it a distorted church.
Distorted is a very strong word. So let's look at the blueprint for this. How does he justify it? Because when I open a Bible, I see the word covenant. I definitely don't see economic contract.
And that's the first major shift we need to make. We're so used to the word covenant, which sounds very religious, very ceremonial.
It does.
But Gildong Mu insists on using the word contract.
Why contract, though? It sounds so cold.
I think that's the point. He uses it because he wants to emphasize the binding, legal and structural nature of the relationship. A contract has terms.
Right, it has obligations.
Exactly. He explains that God established three fundamental institutions in the world: the nation, the family, and the church.
Okay, the big three. Nation, family, church.
Right. And the church, or Israel back in the Old Testament, is the group that signs this contract with God. But here's the kicker, and this really gets to your point about the spiritual versus the economic.
Yeah.
Gildong Mu says you can't bypass the church to get to Jesus.
Hold on a second. That sounds really controversial.
Yeah.
The whole ethos of, modern Christianity, especially Protestantism, is the personal relationship.
Me and Jesus.
Yeah, it's me and God. I don't need a middleman. I don't need an institution.
And he challenges that individualism head on. He points out that the Bible explicitly calls the church the body and Jesus the head.
Okay, that's a common metaphor. I've heard that.
But just follow the logic. Can you have a relationship with the head while you're ignoring or, starving the body?
Okay.
Gildong Mu argues that salvation happens through the community. It's a collective contract. And like any contract, it has terms.
Okay, I'll bite. So if I sign this contract, what are the terms? What am I actually agreeing to do?
You're agreeing to realize the Jubilee.
The Jubilee. Okay, that's the Old Testament concept, right?
Right.
Every 50 years, you hit the reset button.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Debts are canceled, slaves are freed, land is returned to its original owners. But Gildong Mu says we tend to spiritualize this.
Make it a metaphor.
Yeah, make it about forgiveness of sins in this abstract way. He drags it right back down to the ground. He defines Jubilee as the realization of absolute economic equality.
Absolute. That sounds like a fantasy. I mean, we live in a democracy. We value legal equality, one person, one vote.
Sure.
But economic equality, that doesn't exist anywhere on Earth.
And that's his point. Legal equality means almost nothing if you're starving. Gildong Mu draws a direct line to our modern world, the 99% versus the 1%.
Right.
He argues that the biblical contract was a specific social technology designed 3,500 years ago to prevent that 1% from even existing.
So the church was designed to be the antidote to wealth inequality.
Precisely. It was supposed to be a countercultural society, a holy nation where the gap between rich and poor was like legally and structurally impossible.
I do want to push back on this a little bit because it feels like he might be reading modern economics back into these ancient texts. I mean, when Jesus or Moses were talking, were they really thinking about wealth inequality the way we do?
That's a fair question.
Or were they just talking about being charitable, being nice?
And this is where the deep dive gets a little dark, but it's so necessary. To understand the why, you have to look at the who. Who was the audience?
Okay.
Gildong Mu uses some really striking examples from Korean history specifically the 1950s and 60s, to illustrate the level of poverty we're talking about. He uses these terms, Miozeum, Sikmo, and Iboki.
I saw those in the notes. I'm not familiar with them. Can you break those down?
Yeah, these are the faces of just extreme poverty. A Miozeum was a farmhand, but not like an employee. This was a man who lived at a master's house, essentially as a serf, because he had no land of his own.
So indentured servitude.
Basically, yes, he worked for food and a place to sleep. This was a kitchen maid, often a very young girl sent away by her parents to work day and night in a stranger's house just so she could be fed.
Because her parents couldn't feed her.
They couldn't.
Yeah.
And the Ibaki, that was a child laborer, sent to another family as a nanny to carry babies on their back because their own parents couldn't afford to keep them.
Wow.
We're talking about families being literally torn apart by simple hunger. Fathers becoming servants, daughters being sent away just to survive.
That's a grim picture. It's not just being poor, it's the total disintegration of the family unit.
It is. But that was the reality for most of the ancient world, for the audience of the gospel. So Gildong Mu presents a scenario. Imagine walking up to a father who has just sold his daughter into servitude because he can't buy wheat. And you tell him, don't worry, if you believe this doctrine, you'll go to heaven when you die.
Yeah. That doesn't feel like good news. It feels dismissive. It feels insulting.
Gildong Mu goes further. He calls it blasphemy.
Blasphemy.
He argues that telling a starving person to focus on the afterlife is mocking their suffering. To a person in that situation, the only thing that qualifies as good news is the promise of economic self-reliance, the ability to live together as a family without starving.
So when the Bible talks about salvation, he's saying it means being saved from poverty right now?
Yes, the contract of the church is to ensure its members have economic security today. He argues a church that ignores this and only preaches soul salvation is betraying its core mission.
It's offering a fake gospel.
That's his argument.
That is a massive shift. It really moves the goalposts from the afterlife to the dinner table. But let's play devil's advocate. Is this just theory? Does he have evidence that the early church actually worked this way?
He does.
Because I've read the book of Acts. I remember the tongues of fire, the miracles, the speaking in different languages. I don't remember the economic contract.
That's because we look for the fireworks and we miss the foundation.
Yeah.
Gildong Mu points out that Luke, the author of Acts, was obsessed with the economics. Immediately after that huge spiritual high of Pentecost, what does the text say the believers did?
They gathered together.
It says all believers were together and had everything in common. And then it gets specific. They sold their property and possessions to give to anyone in need.
Everything in common. I mean, let's be honest, that sounds a lot like communism.
It does sound similar, but the mechanism is totally different.
Right.
Communism is state-enforced redistribution.
Right.
This was a voluntary yet mandatory condition of the contract. Gildong Mu really emphasizes this wasn't just a charity drive. It wasn't give what you can spare from your surplus.
No.
It was a fundamental restructuring of assets.
Liquidating assets. That's the key phrase there.
Exactly. If you were a believer and you owned 3 fields and your brother in the church had no food, you sold a field. It was a mandate. The goal was to ensure that literally no one in the community was poor.
And this has to tie into that other term we use all the time, right? Breaking bread.
It does.
We think of communion, the little wafer and the, shot of juice on Sunday morning.
Right, the ritual. But Gildong Mu stops us right there. He says in the early church, breaking bread wasn't a symbol.
It wasn't.
It was lunch.
Actual food.
Yes, worship had 2 parts, learning the words of Jesus and joint dining. So remember, many of these people couldn't afford a midday meal.
Ah.
So the wealthy members selling their land provided the cash to buy the food so that everyone, slave, free, rich, poor, ate the same food at the same table.
So the Eucharist began as a kind of soup kitchen.
A very high dignity soup kitchen, a shared family meal. That is economic equality in action. You're not just tossing a coin to a beggar. You are sitting at the same table eating the same bread.
This makes me look at the Apostle Paul completely differently because traditionally, Paul is the theology guy. He's the one writing the complex letters about justification and faith and the law. We don't usually think of him as an economic organizer.
And this is one of the most fascinating parts of Gildong Mu's analysis. He argues we have completely misread Paul. We see him as a writer, but he was actually the boots-on-the-ground architect of this economic community.
But Paul was a tent maker, right? That's the famous detail. I always just thought that was a side hustle.
A hobby.
Yeah, hobby to pass the time.
Far from it. I mean, consider Paul's background. He was from Tarsus, a major city. His family was likely aristocratic, Roman citizens, highly educated.
Right.
In that culture, a man like Paul should never have touched manual labor. It would have been beneath him. It would have been shameful.
So why did he do it?
Gildong Mu argues Paul engaged in manual labor, specifically to model this new economic reality. He worked to fund his mission, sure, but he was also leveling down. He was showing the wealthy converts that in this new community, labor has dignity.
He was putting his money where his mouth was.
And generating resources to support the poor. And this leads to that very famous quote from Paul that gets misused in politics all the time.
Which one?
If a man will not work, he shall not eat.
Oh, yeah. I've heard that one used to argue against welfare programs. Don't feed the lazy.
It's completely weaponized that way. But Gildong Mu puts it back in its context inside this community of radical sharing. I mean, think about it. If you create a community where everyone shares everything, where all needs are met, what's the biggest risk?
Freeloaders. People who realize they can just show up and get free lunch without contributing anything.
Exactly, the free rider problem.
Yeah.
Paul's rule wasn't about starving the destitute. It was about protecting the community fund. It ensured that the able-bodied contributed, so that resources were available for those who truly couldn't work, the sick, the disabled, the elderly.
It's a safeguard for the economic contract. It makes the whole system viable.
Right. Paul wasn't just preaching theology. He was building a sustainable economic safety net.
I want to circle back to the author of Acts, Luke. You mentioned earlier he was focused on this economic stuff. Why him specifically? Was he just like a numbers guy?
No, he's an outsider.
Yeah.
Gildong Mu highlights that Luke wasn't the Jewish disciple. He didn't walk with Jesus in Galilee.
Okay.
He was a Gentile physician, likely educated in a place like Alexandria, an intellectual.
So he's coming at this with completely fresh eyes.
Completely. And Gildong Mu suggests that when Luke encountered this movement, he wasn't initially shocked by the theology. He was shocked by the economics.
Sure.
He had never seen a community where people voluntarily sold their land to feed strangers. In the Roman world, class hierarchy was everything.
Right.
You didn't dine with people below your station, and you certainly didn't liquidate your family estate for them. That was insanity.
So for Luke, the big miracle wasn't the speaking in tongues. The miracle was that rich people were treating poor people like family.
Exactly. Gildong Mu argues that Luke wrote the book of Acts specifically to document this impossible community. He wanted to record that a group of people actually attempted to realize the Jubilee. He saw it as the defining proof that God was involved.
It really does change how you read the text. It's not just a religious history. It's a record of a radical economic experiment.
An experiment that, according to Gildong Mu, defines whether a church is actually a church.
So let's bring this all the way home. We started with, what is the church? And his answer is, it's not a building. It's not a worship service. It's a contract community designed to ensure economic survival.
Right. The good news isn't just you go to heaven when you die. It's you will not starve today. It is you will have dignity.
And the warning.
The warning is stark. Gildong Mu says that if a church today ignores economic justice, if it ignores the gap between the rich and the poor within its own pews and only preaches soul salvation, it is a distorted church.
A betrayal of the mission.
You can't claim to be the body of Christ if the foot is gangrenous from starvation while the hand is wearing a gold ring. Wow. The contract is broken.
That is. Well, it's a heavy realization. It forces us to look at our modern institutions, our megachurches, our denominations, and ask if they're actually doing the job they were designed for.
It does. It suggests that our metrics for success, attendance numbers, budget size, building aesthetics, might be completely wrong. The only metric that matters is anyone in this community in need?
And that leads me to the final thought I want to leave everyone with today. We've talked about how the early church required liquidating assets. I mean, literally selling homes to ensure equality. So here's the question. If that is the biblical standard, this total economic pooling of resources, would any institution we see today actually qualify as a church? Or have we created something entirely different and just slapped the same label on it?
That's the question. And I think if Luke were here today, he might be just as shocked by our churches as he was by the early one, but for very different reasons.
Something to chew on. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the work of Gildong Mu.
Thanks for listening.
We'll catch you on the next deep dive.